Hello and welcome to Culture Reset with me, Juliette Kumar.
And me, Caroline Kenyon.
For regular listeners, you'll know that we like to hear from people who are making a difference by resetting culture to improve well-being at work. Getting culture right isn't just about helping individuals to get the most out of work, it also helps organisations to get the most out of individuals.
And our guest today is a man on a mission, may I say. In fact, two missions. One is about improving workplace culture, as Juliette's just said, and the other is about making his particular sort of workplace more attractive to job seekers. And he is Gary Lasham, Chair of Barron's Contract Furniture. Welcome, Barry. Gary, would you like to... Sorry. Welcome, Gary.
Gary.
Would you like to introduce yourself better than I have just done?
Thank you for the kind words. Gary Lasham, career in manufacturing industry in the UK. Fortunate enough now to be chair of a business called Barron's Contract Furniture, which is a kind of combination of my career, really. But we'll talk about that in more detail later. But backed by Liverpool private equity fund River Capital, an exciting business to be part of. So, but culture is something that's held an important place in my heart for nearly 50 years in manufacturing. So excited to talk about it.
Just to touch on Barron's Furniture, Gary, you're brought in by River Capital, as you say. Why did they choose you? Why did they ask you? And what brief did they give you for the role?
I think there's two reasons they asked me to take a look at the business. One, I have sector experience. So my last job, full-time job, was chief executive of the big furniture making company, in fact, the biggest in the UK. But also, I've got a lot of experience doing private equity-based investments, so leading businesses as a managing director or CEO, and now as a chair. So I understand the dynamics of running a PE business, which can vary from a conventional private business, FTSE business, or whatever. But I've done both of them as well.
PE being private equity.
Sorry,
yeah, it's okay, don't worry.
So private equity. I think people misunderstand private equity. Private equity is what I would call risk money. These are businesses that are prepared to use their skills, their judgment, and risk money to back businesses. Whereas if you go to a bank and want to buy £5 million to buy a business, it's put collateral up. But private equity is all about backing people and businesses to grow businesses with private money. It's quite an exciting place to work. It's a very demanding place to work, but the rewards for everyone can be terrific.
But you've obviously got targets to meet and goals to achieve.
For sure. Everything from, performance of the business to cash flow requirements to covenants with banks and private equity companies. So if you're not hitting your numbers, then you're under some stress. So it's no different to PLC or whatever, but it's private money as opposed to money raised in the city or whatever. So it's funds, private money funds.
And that's a company based in the Northwest, isn't it? Headquarters in Leyland?
Now in Leyland. It was originally in Lytham St Anne's, but we needed part of the business plan and part of the vision we had for the business was to move it into five or six individual small units. We moved into a brand new factory in Leyland. They weren't available in Lytham. Lytham isn't known as an industrial heartland. But Leyland, redeveloping the Leyland Truck Plant facility, has got some fantastic units, very close to the motorway. Both are going east, west, and north, south. So we've completed that move only a few weeks ago. So quite exciting.
Congratulations. Well done. So we're going to talk a little later about manufacturing, making it more sexy for people looking for work. But first of all, workplace culture. Why is that so important to you when, as you just said, it's really about improving productivity and performance?
I think there's two answers to that lead to the same point, really. One, when I started my career, I started on the factory floor. I was an apprentice engineer, spent 4 years of my life working on the factory floor with my hands, learning how to operate milling machines, lathes, sheet metal work, welding, the sort of apprenticeship you don't really get nowadays, actually. And I loved being on, and it's really weird, I loved working on the factory shop floor. I loved big machines and swarf flying everywhere and taking lumps of metal and producing something that goes into a car or whatever. And I loved the environment, the people, the support that I was getting as a young apprentice by the old lags who were keen to pass on their skills. So first and foremost, I think there's an understanding how the people dynamic can work positively and negatively. That was in the late 70s, so it was trade unions. It was quite an industrial unrest period. So it really switched me on to the pros and negatives of a culture in the business, both from the bottom up and the top down, more importantly. But then it sort of dawned on me as I went through my career that, and actually whether it's a health service or a factory or a marketing company, a factory full of machines is an inanimate object. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there doing nothing. The glue that brings a business together, makes a business or any venture succeed, is the people in it. And without the people, literally, the business is nothing. So if the people are the blood running through and the organs of the business, then what you really want to be doing is paying as much attention to that as possible, because healthy blood, healthy organs, coupled with the mechanics of the NHS or a manufacturing business, will give you a positive outcome. And I've seen, I've worked in business that had terrible cultures. And I've worked in businesses that have had great cultures. And I suppose my philosophy, if that's the right word, is based on those learnings. It's just the learnings of 50 years in industry, to be perfectly honest.
You mentioned about working in both good workplace cultures and bad. What's been your takes from both of those experiences?
Well, we'll do a deeper dive on this, I'm sure. But a good cultural workforce is a workforce that's well informed, well motivated, understand the group objectives and the individual objectives. That management are communicating on a regular basis. And a bad culture is the antithesis of that. That you're sitting in the dark, you're pulling this lever, and you don't know why you're pulling the lever, and you don't know what the vision is for the lever pulling. Your job is to go and pull the lever, and that's demoralising. That's not a poor culture. That's demoralising. And actually, I was thinking about this driving in. It's no different to whatever your sport is. A football team, we all have our football teams, and when your football team is flying because of the culture in the team, they're all playing for each other, they're passing the ball because they can see that he can score, or she. The teams that are not performing well are people who've got a really poor culture. They're not playing for the team, they're playing for themselves. And we come up with a good golfing analogy about the Ryder Cup if we wanted to, but we've come on to that private analysis.
Or another episode.
Yeah.
Tell us about a time when you've gone into a company with a really poor culture, how bad it was. Tell us what that was like, what was going wrong.
Well, I won't name the business, but there was a business that I took over as managing director, CEO of, and it was multiple sites, multiple businesses, not just multiple sites, multiple businesses. So one business made X, one business made Y, and the businesses survived in isolation. They didn't survive. They didn't understand their role as part of a wider group. So consequently, business A over there had no understanding what business B over there was doing. And likewise, there was no opportunities for cross-fertilization between the businesses, because they would see opportunities that they didn't want, but that would be good for that business. And management didn't really engage across the business. They would just parachute into each individual business, have a meeting once a month and so forth. And I set about transforming that to becoming a group with a group vision, with a group goal that broke down into the individual businesses and what their contribution to the group was, and then within that business for them to break that down to their individual employees. So everyone saw that when the group got the publicity, what that meant for them, or what their contribution had done to the group. And it's no different to, I come back to this a lot actually, use of the UK military, because I still believe we are one of the finest militaries in the world, especially the army. But if you want to do the D-Day landing, which is a pretty big, complex operation, you made a bow at the top, which was Eisenhower or Churchill or whatever, but you still want that private who's landing on the beach to know what he's doing and why he's doing it, because actually he's risking his life to do it. So culture and getting culture right is not a new thing. It goes back a long way. So that's one example.
And how did you do what you just said you did at that group of companies? How did you get them all cohesive, supporting each other?
I'd like to say gentle coercion, but sort of I think the first objective, the first thing I did is to set a firm objectives and say, right, this is where as a group we are going, and then communicating that, and then making sure that is cascaded down into the business. And ever since I first had a management role in businesses, and it was a single site operation, I made sure my colleagues going forward do this. You walk the floor. You spend, if I was running a business, I'll be on that factory floor every day. I run a business in Speak down the road here, a big printing business that was losing money. I went out on the shop floor. I stood in the presses talking to the minders, as we used to call them, the press operators. How you doing? I wasn't a printer, but I remember talking to a number one printer, as they were called in the old union days. And I said, well, you're running at 5,000 sheets an hour. Why are you running at 5,000? He said, well, that's the agreement. I said, well, how fast can that machine go? He said, 10,000 sheets an hour. So the union agreement said you could only run it at 5. So this is stuff you wouldn't find out without walking around the shop floor. And I made a point of knowing, and this wasn't difficult in Liverpool, which football teams people supported, right? So Fred on +1 was a Liverpool fan. Oh, yeah, good game in the weekend. Just get engaged with people. And in the bad old days, I used to smoke. And my richest vein of content was the smoking room. It's popping out for a cigarette. You get to hear all sorts. You would know who was doing what and where. It was remarkable. So, we'll come on to advice later, but it's just whatever your business is, get around it. And we'll talk about COVID a bit later as well and experiences about that. Get around with it, understand your people and make sure they understand you. It's really not difficult. And actually, it's really enjoyable. A lot of people don't have the confidence to do it, funny enough. A lot of people, I've known people who run companies have never walked around a factory. Who don't really understand the process, don't understand the people. Well, that's where dragons lay, really. You really need to engage with the business. And
it's fear of meeting your own staff.
I think if I was being controversial, I think there's been a huge cultural shift in the way people run businesses. I thought it was very bad in the 60s and 70s, and I think if we're not careful, we're heading back that way. And what I mean by that is, if I go back to my career, as I came through, when did I graduate? 21. I was 21, so I was 79. So my career has come to the 80s and 90s and noughties. Most of the people I worked with and my contemporaries had come up the same way. They come up through the factory floor. They'd been a clinician in the NHS. They'd learned their skills. They knew the businesses. They knew the science involved or the engineering involved or whatever. And then we went through a period where, and it happened in the police force, it happened in the NHS, it happened all over, where people would go and get high-powered degrees and just get parachuted into senior roles. And yes, they could speak Greek, but they had no concept and very little interpersonal skills at the levels we're talking about. They could go and talk to other scholars, but their ability to manage down and manage up just hadn't been ingrained. They were academics.
So there's some learning that graduates go through after their degree, understanding the messy nature of organisations.
Yes, but that was the system years ago when you had apprentices who went and did what we used to call ONC and HNC, if you remember. You'd spend 4 days a week in a factory, you'd go and spend a day a week at college. If you were particularly adept, you'd maybe go into a polytechnic. And a polytechnic, again, if you remember, were destined to be the more practical places to learn. They were academic, but they weren't all about theory. I mean, I went to a polytechnic. We had a workshop with mills, and later we would learn to operate machinery. We would learn about trade union negotiation. There's a much more practical side to it. And what we're seeing now is a re-emergence. There's a big debate about education and student debt, so we won't go there. But people are saying, why do I need to incur £50,000 of student debt when actually I can join, if I can find one, a management scheme, an apprentice scheme, or whatever, and learn the skills on the job, get paid to doing that. And if you're a craftsman today, whether you're a plumber, electrician, whatever, you can have very, very healthy living without having £50,000 of debt around you.
Absolutely. We're veering onto your second mission, Gary. But I was just reading yesterday, actually, about the shortage in those skills that the UK has, which may hold it back. But we're not going there just yet, because I just wanted to touch on, being a communications person, the importance of internal communication. You've talked about walking the floor, but also just communicating generally. And I know you've got a great example from COVID, haven't you, about how you did that to hold the staff together?
Well, COVID. So when COVID hit, I was running a business with about 12 plants, 2,000 plus people in 2 countries. So we were in the UK and Romania. And we forget now, 6 years on, what a hurricane COVID was, because no one had a Scooby what was going on. The government said, right, as of Monday, we're shut down. Well, I think it was on Monday. What does that mean? And so immediately we had a team of people, about half a dozen of us, because the private equity company were concerned, where was the cash coming in? We couldn't make anything. We still got wages. Oh my God. And I had a core cadre of about 6 people. And every morning, 9 o'clock, we're on a call. What's happening is this, what's happening. Then the JRS scheme came in, if you remember, and we had to manage that. So we knew what was going on. We didn't like it. We didn't understand it. But we were able to react quite quickly because we're a small team. And it dawned on me that as bad as I felt about what was going on, I at least knew what was going on. But Sandra, who operated the sewing machine in Ilkeston, didn't have a clue. So I thought, well, what's the best way to do that? We'd already had a Facebook group for all our employees. So I got to the point that every Friday afternoon, I would sit in my study, because we weren't going to the office, casually dressed, and I'd do a video. And I had no idea how popular, not popular actually, how important that video became, because that was a metronome. Every Friday, if you're an employee of my business, you got a video. It's telling you what was happening, what businesses were doing what, who was where, what was happening with the JRS, what my view of what was going on when we come back to work. And people could pose questions, all sorts of things like that. And about 2 years ago, I was at a concert in Manchester. It was, what do they call it, half-time in the concert? Interlude. That's it. And I went for a beer with a friend. And this guy came up to me and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I thought, "I'm awfully sorry, I've done it." He said, "Well, I was a designer at so-and-so." And he said, "Your Facebook posts kept me sane, because at least I knew, because all my mates didn't have a clue what was going on. Can I buy you a beer?" I thought, okay.
Wonderful.
That's
Wonderful.
lovely.
The power of communication,
Yeah,
Juliette.
absolutely.
It's a good story, that.
That is a good story. I like that. But day to day, business as usual, of course, internal communication. What does that look like? Not in COVID, not doing your...
Yeah, well, okay, that's, again, it depends on your business, the scale of the business. Smaller businesses are easier. So I go to 2 extremes. So when I was running single site businesses, I'd be having monthly briefings to the workforce. So literally everyone in the canteen, PowerPoint presentations it used to be, and Q&A. And it would all be about, these are our objectives for the year, why these are our objectives, what that means for you on that machine, here's how we're doing, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, we've had no lost time accidents for 3 months, so it's free pizzas on Friday. We'll come on to health and safety in a second as a key driver. When you're running a much bigger enterprise, that's obviously a lot more difficult, whether it's a huge enterprise like a hospital or an airline or whatever. And you've got to find what works for you and your people. For me, it was getting around the businesses first and foremost, but making clear the objectives of the group. This is where we're going, and communicating that down. Now, I've never been one for newsletters or written communications. So I would use a system which I'd talk to my board. The board would go and talk to their businesses. The businesses would talk to the team leaders. The team leaders would have what we used to call toolbox talks. I don't know if you heard of that phrase. So everyone would come in the morning with their toolboxes, sit around, have a coffee, and we'd talk about the day. What's the objectives for the day? What's happening in the wider world? What's the health and safety record this month? What da, da, da. So
I think in healthcare they're probably called huddles, safety huddles. Yeah.
So that's probably a sign of our respective ages. I'm a toolbox talker, you're a huddler. But it's exactly the same thing. It's an informal, friendly way of communicating the business rather than some missive on high. You will do with us.
So you talked a little bit about structure, objectives, having everybody understanding their role, I'm paraphrasing, and where they fit into the bigger machine and where you're all going. But then also the softer side, I call it the, communication, the walk-arounds, making sure that you're plugged in to the floor and to the front line, if you like, so you're understanding what's going on and hearing those stories. And I guess, when you've gone in somewhere and you've got the task of taking over or turning round or whatever, what have been important metrics to you in terms of seeing that things are going well? So that might be, is staff retention better? What's been important to you?
And safety. You mentioned, you touched on
I
safety.
did that. So I've always used health and safety as an important mechanism to drive cultural change, because if you make the safety of you, and bear in mind I work in factories which are intrinsically quite tricky places to work in, some more than others, but I've always thought if you can be seen, and I passionately feel about it, so I'm not doing it because I think I should be doing it, it's because I feel passionate about it. If you can be seen to be putting the well-being of your employees first and foremost, then that's a start to people going, well, at least management or whatever care about the environment we're working in, and so on and so forth. So health and safety. So whenever I've had a board meeting, I joined the business some years ago, not as chief exec. I joined as commercial director to shadow the chief exec. And I went to the first board meeting, and the chairman afterwards said, well, jolly good board meeting, Gary, what do you think? I said, well, you didn't discuss health and safety, chairman. And he said, what do you think we should? I said, we got 2,000 employees. Yes, I think you put it. I said, leave it with me, I'll sort it out. And it just didn't, that every meeting you will ever see me conduct or any of my team conduct, whatever level in the business, will talk about health and safety first. So that's one metric. Then there's two other key metrics, really. And I'll put aside the fact my job is to make a profit ultimately for whoever my investors are. But one has to be operation output for me, and any organisation, again, NHS. How are we doing things more efficiently? Are we getting a better outcome? And whatever that outcome might be, it might be widgets, it might be getting people healthier quicker, increasing the utilisation of operating theatres, whatever. Are we getting better outcomes? And thirdly, you mentioned job retention. I don't think job retention was ever on the agenda in British manufacturing 20 years ago. So I don't think it was an issue. There was plenty of jobs for people. They went where they wanted to go. And I think it's only in the last 20 years or so that people are saying, do you know what, I've just spent 5 years training this apprentice, nurse, marketeer, whatever. It's cost me a lot of money. I want to benefit from the skills that I've invested in. And how do I make sure he or she doesn't shoot off to Australia because it's nice and sunny and they're going to pay $10,000 a year more? So, yes, I think today, and certainly for the last 20 years, job retention is key. And there's a really good mechanism for assisting that, which is, and I didn't invent this, I learned it when I was in a PLC. Every employee we have, down to team leader level, for the last 10 years, as what we call PDPs, so personal development plans. So if you're working in my business and you're a director, you sit with me twice a year. And there's a formal document, so right, how are we getting on? What objectives did we set? You're not hitting that objective, why not? What can we do to help? What are your ambitions? Oh, well, I'd like to get, well, what do you think you need to do to get, well, I don't really understand Excel. Right, well, we'll get you on Excel, whatever. And that's again cascaded through. So I genuinely think if people are working in a business which has a positive culture, which is a happy place to work, which is a decent place to work, what do I mean by that? When M&S used to audit my factories, the first place I always used to go was the toilet. The guy who used to do it, so if you can't keep decent toilets for your employees, you're not much of it. So, pleasant place to work, feel like you're being well informed, feel like you're being cared for, and you've got a personal development plan for you personally through that business. I can't do a lot of it, and I'm paying a competitive rate. Then I think you're ticking a lot of boxes for that. Sorry, am I increasing?
So, we'd love to hear about your other passion to get people, young people in particular, interested in manufacturing as a career. You started yourself on the shop floor. So, why should young people consider joining your industry, particularly in these days of tech and the boom in AI-based businesses?
Yeah, well, the boom in AI is probably a bit of an oxymoron because it's probably going to cost more jobs than this. Because I'm just a simple engineer. I'm not a politician. It just seems to me there's some obvious metrics at work here, which is in the early 90s or late 90s, we changed the direction of travel for education in our country, where I think the government at the time set an ambition to have 40% of the population gain a degree, which was great and laudable at the time. But then they had to find a way of funding that, and hence we pay. If I was listening to a podcast yesterday, it said when they started out, student union fees were £1,000 a year. They went to £3,000 a year. Then 9,000. I don't know what they are nowadays. More than that, I guess. But we've got a huge talented group of graduates who have got 50, sometimes more, £1,000 invested in education that can't find the roles, and that's becoming a real problem today. Whereas there are so many opportunities for people to come into the workplace at whatever. I talk about factories, but it is true of any business, and we touched on it earlier on. And just learn about the business, learn your skill, learn your craft, whether you're a hairdresser or a turner on a lathe or whatever. Learn your craft and grow up through the business. And that's the way it always was. People learn their craft, they became an engineer, they become a foreman, they become a supervisor, they become a manager, they become a director. That's how it used to be, but they learned their craft. And what we now face ourselves is we have a glut of very talented graduates that can't find work, and we have a dearth of skilled people who can't fix a pipe, wire a plug, whatever. I'm old enough to remember British manufacturing. We were one of the great manufacturing nations of the world. We had the skills, we had the innovation, and we're rapidly losing our place, with some exceptions. Rolls-Royce, JCB, we touched on it. Formula One, funny enough. But anybody, any business today, and I include my own, if you're not investing in what I would call apprenticeships or training programs to take young people either straight from school and teach them the skill. So I'll give you an example. We upholster product where we are now. So upholstery is not something. AI is great. AI does what I don't really understand AI, but it does what it does. But at the end of the day, you still want to buy food, sit in a chair, drive a car. You need people to make stuff because that's what you need. So an upholsterer, probably to take a 16, 17-year-old individual and train them as a skilled upholsterer would probably take a year to 2 years. A skilled upholsterer today can earn 50, 60, 70,000 pounds a year and be in demand. And they can learn that and become a senior. Now, all right, you don't want to be an upholsterer, but there's plenty of examples like that. In America, I was there the other week when they were talking about the new working class millionaires. Because if you're a plumber or a house builder or a roofer in America, where everybody just really wants to drive a BMW, so you can't buy BMW anymore, but and be on a mobile phone. But the guys who are building the houses, repairing the houses, digging the sewers, they're the guys who are making the big money. Guys, I mean in the generic sense.
Same in Australia, I found when I was there.
Oh, well, there you go.
A really big time shortage of skilled craftsmen, and those who enter the trade and learn the trade, they're off building their own businesses and making big bucks as well. Yeah. So definitely the way to go. But what's happening to make it more attractive? You say individual businesses have got their part to play. creating apprenticeships, but overall, the bigger picture of making it more appealing, what's happening?
I don't think we do enough to educate. And I run a business for a living. I'm not in politics, but I don't think we do enough to demonstrate or communicate the opportunities that there are to learn a craft, whatever that may be, and what it might mean for you as an individual going forward. We don't go. So something you talk about AI. Everyone talks about AI. Well, okay, AI is just Google on speed, isn't it? It's just. I mean, we will continue globally to be a civilization that needs stuff making, fixing, repairing, inventing. Okay. The fact you may use AI to augment that, make it happen a bit quicker, write your CV for you, or read, or more importantly, or more disgustingly, read the CVs nowadays. That's a tool. AI is a tool. But, core competencies around building an economy are about making stuff. You can't, don't get me on politics, but you can't tax your way to prosperity. You have to build your way to prosperity. So I think there's a disconnect. It's a long answer, so sorry. I generally think there's a disconnect between a 16, 17, 18-year-old thinking about how do I build a successful life that I can afford a home and a car and a family. And I don't think we publicise the opportunity.
So more should be done.
I think so. I think a global campaign, not global campaign, a UK-wide campaign where the big companies who are recognised, maybe my business is a small business, but if an M&S, and they do it, to be fair, John Lewis do it, Rolls-Royce do it, JCB do it, but these aren't known, they're not publicised. You're not seeing TV shows about it, which is, or Instagram feeds about. Well, the one I do see actually is the young lady who joined Amazon. That's quite popular, and then was trained as an electrician, and now she's a technical, I can't remember. But Amazon is doing it because Amazon realizes it cannot find these people. So they're taking people in initially to delivery drivers. They're training to be skilled administrators in their business.
So it's happening, it's being done.
But not enough.
Not enough. Okay.
I think there is a recognition of craft and people who can make things, build things, illustrate things, the things that AI have been shown to be, they use the term AI slop now, don't they? So all these kind of like AI art or whatever, so recognizable. So there's a real appreciation now around things that you can touch and feel rather than it being in the cloud.
We talked about the arts earlier. I mean, how
the
arts
absolutely.
You're not going to get AI making a film.
Yeah.
You can actually.
No, don't.
Sorry, and write books.
Yeah, but you can read them.
And make music.
And create podcasts.
People are making
Gary.
Spotify.
And they won't get your name wrong.
Making money off of Spotify with AI.
We could go on. Okay, so I think we're with you on this mission. If I was starting again.
Yeah.
And if I had any practical skills, I have none. Right, we're with you, but we have to close now. And we're going to close with our final question.
Okay.
Juliette, do you want to put the final question?
Yes, it's something that we always ask every guest that we have on our podcast, and that is, what is the one tip that you would pass on to others from your learning?
I could go on about this as well, but I'll give you a simple example. When an officer trainee goes to Sandhurst, he gets given a book, and the book is called Serve to Lead. So everybody in the British Army for 100 years has read this book. And what it basically means is you eat last. If you're an officer in the British Army, you look after your men, women, okay, and then they look after you. And that's my simple message. We talked about management books and so forth earlier. You can write management books that thick. But if a leader, not a manager, a leader in a business is looking after his people first and foremost, sorry to bang the table, first and foremost, then he won't be doing much wrong.
Thank you, Gary Lasham, Chair of Barron's Contract Furniture.
And thank you, Gary. That was a great note to end on. I really enjoyed that. Serve to lead, yeah. And when you see leaders doing that, it really does have an impact. So thank you.
And thank you for listening. Do check out the podcast page to catch up on conversations and more great guests talking about how they have reset culture. And please follow us so that you don't miss a future episode. So for now, it's goodbye from me, Juliette Kumar.
And me, Caroline Kenyon. Goodbye.
And me, Gary Lasham. Goodbye.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.